Diego asks, would you mind showing me how to properly bleed a Reverb Dropper Post? Whether you're running a regular Reverb or a Reverb Stealth, this video will guide you through the bleed process. Let's get started. Before starting, make sure you have the following nearby: a 4mm Allen, RockShox bleed kit, T10 and T25 Torx wrenches. Making sure that your post is in the up position, use the 4mm Allen to remove your saddle from your post. If you have a regular Reverb, then you can leave the post in the bike. However, if you have a Reverb Stealth, mark your seat post position with Scotch tape, then remove the handlebar remote using the T25 Torx wrench, loosen your seat post clamp, and while pulling the post out of the frame, simultaneously push the remote hose into the frame. Once your seat post is out, zip tie it to your rear wheel with the hose unkinked and pointing up. Remount your remote on your handlebar such that the bleed screw is at the highest point on the handlebar. Throughout this process, make sure that all brake components are either covered or are well out of the way of any bleed ports to avoid getting reverb fluid on them and costing you much more than just a simple bleed. The next step is crucial to a good reverb bleed. Turn the speed adjust on the remote in the opposite direction of the arrow until it stops. Failure to do so will result in a bad bleed. Fill a RockShox bleed syringe with 20 milliliters of fluid. While holding it upright, depress the plunger to purge any air bubbles from the syringe and into a rag. Using your T10, remove the bleed screw from the remote and thread the syringe into the remote bleed port. Fill your second syringe with 5 milliliters of fluid and repeat the purge process. Remove the bleed screw from your seat post with the T10 and thread in the second syringe. Depress the remote plunger in while pulling the seat post plunger out. Reverse and repeat the process until air bubbles are no longer seen coming out of the system. Once your system is purged, remove the syringe from the seat post and reinstall the bleed screw with the T10. With the syringe still installed on the remote, pull up on the plunger and slowly depress the remote actuator. Then depress the plunger firmly until the remote actuator fully extends. Repeat this process until there are no more bubbles coming from the remote. Before removing the syringe, depress the plunger one last time. Remove the syringe and reinstall the bleed screw. Wipe down the seat post and remote with isopropyl alcohol and a clean rag. To check your work, depress the remote actuator button a few times. If the button returns to normal and you cannot pull back on the button, then your bleed is complete. However, if the actuator can be pulled back, then there is not enough fluid in the system and you'll need to repeat the bleed process. Use friction paste to install the seat post in carbon frames and torque your seat post clamp to spec, making sure not to exceed 6.7 Newton meters. Reinstall your remote and your saddle. Once everything is reinstalled, test the system to ensure it's functioning properly and hit the trails. If you want your question answered on Ask a Mechanic presented by Cyclery, send your inquiry to content@artcyclery.com.